So now that UFC 306 is wrapped up, I've had a couple days to digest it. I want to move forward on a matchup that got released recently, and that is Paul Craig versus Bo Nickal. And it's kind of gotten mixed reviews, but I think it makes sense. You got Paul Craig, who has been in two divisions, and I think he understands the belt's not coming to him anytime soon, right? Or he's past his prime a little bit. He's getting older, and it just doesn't seem like the belt's in the question. So you're going to go for the most marketable fight you can, which is Bo Nickal, who is looking for someone to get himself into the rankings, because I think Bo Nickal decides, I need to fight some people who actually have a little bit of merit. And yeah, it's an easy win for Bo, because stylistically, Bo's got the NCAA All-American credentials, and he's got good striking. And Paul Craig relies mainly on his jiu-jitsu and doesn't have that good of hands for UFC standards. And you know what? That's all right. I'm not saying that Paul Craig doesn't have any business in the UFC, but I just don't know if he has any business ever fighting for a title. I mean, it seemed that way when he beat Jamal Hill, when Jamal Hill was on the come-up, and that was a straight-up jiu-jitsu fight where he just took Jamal Hill to the ground and then, yoinked him a little bit and dislocated the arm. And, that was the biggest humbling moment for Jamal Hill. But other than that, Paul Craig has really been win some, lose some. Now, he's had some success in lower-ranking competitions, but, like I said, he's probably not going to reach that belt at either light heavyweight or middleweight. So, yeah, making a fight with Bo Nickal over Joe Pyfer, who explicitly called you out, is probably the way financially for Paul Craig. He's just looking after how he's going to set himself up after his fight career is over, and that's typically the normal for UFC fighters, because there comes a wind-down time, and I think that's the time for Paul Craig. He served the sport well, and he's always going to have his spot in UFC recognition, but, it happens. It's sad to see. But here comes Bo Nickal, who's going to probably win this fight. I actually predict that Bo Nickal is just going to smoke Paul. And then what you're going to have is Joe Pyfer, who I think he mentioned this fight happening and called Paul Craig like a coward. I believe so. I got to double check my facts on that one. But I remember that's what I see unless I get Mandela affected. But Joe Pyfer versus Bo Nickal, long ago, ever since I saw Joe Pyfer come up before he fought Jack Hermanson, right? I thought that this guy has a lot of potential, and I think Jack Hermanson even was a winnable fight for him. I think he just kind of, slowed down a little too much, let it go the distance, and I wasn't, a lot of people were undersold, and the hype train kind of died down a little bit, but he got a bounce-back win, first-round finish, and he's growing as a fighter. I think he took the loss possible to help him kind of reevaluate himself. And it's good that they take the loss earlier than take the loss later against like the top of the top and then have a gigantic downfall. It's just good for fighters to take a humble lesson early and then, come up a little bit. But then what you have is Bo Nickal versus Joe Pyfer finally. I thought that this was going to happen a long time ago, but a lot of people said, those two need to gain a little bit of steam. And then when they're up in the rankings, it's definitely a number one contender fight, which it is. But, we are seeing that Joe Pyfer might not be as good as we thought. I would have liked to see Joe Pyfer versus Caio Borralho just to see where that goes, but I think Caio would probably favor in that fight. So right now we got to see Joe Pyfer fight someone who is going to push his limits, but probably isn't going to be an overwhelming force. And I think that's Bo Nickal, because although Bo Nickal, if he were to probably go against like Dricus du Plessis or Israel Adesanya, I think he might have some issues. Like Hamzat would probably smoke him. But I really think that Bo Nickal is better than a lot of people at least like to give him credit for. A lot of people love to hate Bo Nickal. They think that the UFC is just pushing him for no reason. When you look at his NCAA credentials and, where he's going in the striking realm, it's totally justifiable that he's a hype train that the UFC is trying to ramp up a little bit and get on the hill and start, making worth something, because they need more stars, especially at middleweight too. And middleweight itself, though, is kind of a gigantic, it is the hardest division. And I think a lot of the characters are entering middleweight. So to see who's going to join the mix, Bo Nickal or Joe Pyfer, that's going to happen in the future, and the setup is going to be Bo Nickal versus Paul Craig. Because that's just going to launch Bo Nickal into justification for fighting Joe. And then we'll see who wins. Because Joe Pyfer versus Bo Nickal is one of those fights where, like, I see both Bo and Joe finishing Paul Craig in the first round, which kind of puts them around the same league. But I do see that fight having to be hard fought for both dudes. And it's just a matter of time before we see Joe Pyfer versus Bo Nickal. And we're almost there. And you know what? Happy to see it. But, yeah. I think I've said what I needed to say on this subject. I'm actually looking forward to UFC 309 just a little bit more because this is the setup chapter for a fight that I've really wanted to see for a while. But peace out. See you later.